Hello class, this is Adam, your instructor. I wanted to give you a brief overview what we did on Monday just to get you on board, and then we're going to talk a little bit about text and what you can expect to do on Wednesday. So here we go. We're in Photoshop CS3. We're working on CS6 in the lab on a Mac. I'm working on a PC. It really doesn't matter at this point. The tools that I'm going to show you are on both versions. Just wanted to give you an overview of what you can expect. So here we are in the Photoshop interface. You'll notice on the left hand side we got a panel of all our tools that are available. We used a few of these tools last week. Actually Monday, that is. And over here on the right hand side we have a few more panels. The layers panel was a big one that we were utilizing when we were manipulating different layers. And then up at the top we have our menu bar. That's going to have other things that you can do. For example, under your image you can take a look at your sizes and do some adjustments, and there's selection options, and of course under the window you can adjust your workspaces and set up some presets or turn on and off panels. So for example, if I deselected the word layers, it takes off my layers palette. If I go back in there and I click on my layers, it's going to pop right back in there. And again, these can be manipulated, moved around, adjusted to your liking so that you can utilize it a little bit easier depending on the kind of setup that you have. So I'm going to redock that with these other guys here. Okay, so first things first, we're going to go to File, New, which we've already done before. We talked about this. I'll call this Project 1. And then down here, I wanted to do everything by pixels, so if it's setting at inches, make sure you change this to pixels. We were working at a 600 width, 300 height, and we talked a little bit about resolution and the color mode that we'd be utilizing. So the resolution, we're working at 72 right now. 300 would be if you're working for print, so 72, we're just going to work for the web. Now, if you're going to work for both, you can go with the 300 DPI. That way, you can get your print version out and always take away some of that pixels per inch once we go to the web. For now, we're just going all web. 72 will work, and the color mode we're going to stay with is RGB. Under the background, we left it at white at one point. I'm going to go ahead and just change that to transparent for right now. I don't need anything in that background layer. So that's going to cover the new setup. I'll hit OK. And then it's going to give me a new box here that I can start doing some edits on. And if you remember from class, if you hold the, I believe it's Control on the Mac, but I know it's Control on the PC. I'm holding Control down with my thumb on the right hand side there, and just clicking on the plus and minus at the top right by the backspace, and you can zoom in and out of your canvas if you want to do that. An alternative way to do that is go over to your little magnifying glass in your tools, and you'll have a little plus one and a minus one. You can always find that in that context bar at the top. So this context bar, just as a reminder, will show you all the different tool stuff that you can do with tools, let's say, because depending on what tool you're on, it's going to adjust up in that menu there. So as I was saying, if you're in this magnifying glass, you can click on the minus, click it, you're going to zoom out a little bit, click the plus sign, and you'll be able to zoom in and out. So just as one last recap, we had also said that if you want to work in Photoshop, you're going to get one little workflow through your mind so you know what you need to do. You're going to start filling this layers palette with layers, so you'll need to click on the layer first, click on the tool that you'll use, make your adjustment, repeat. Layer, tool, adjustment, repeat. Okay, we got that out of the way. Let's start making some stuff in Photoshop. So we're going to make a web graphic, play around with Photoshop, understand what it does. The very first thing I did is I already gave you some images that we can import into Photoshop just to get an idea of how you can import a photo into Photoshop. So one way you can do that is the place function. So once you put place in there, go ahead and jump onto my screen here. I'm going to go and I'm going to put this skull in there. I like the skull. So there we go. We have the skull in my Photoshop document. You're going to notice there's an X right through the skull. That's just letting you know that it's in a manipulation mode, and you can make some adjustments as to the size of this particular skull, or move it around somewhere on the stage. And once you're ready, you can hit enter or double click with your mouse, and it will apply that manipulation. So I wanted to show you before I did too much more with this. I am going to go ahead and double click this, drop it on my screen here. So you'll look in your layers palette and you're going to notice there's this little icon on here, and that's letting you know it's a smart object. And what a smart object does is, if I go to these little handlers, and just as a side note, if you're not seeing these handlers, when you're clicked up on your move tool, up in this top bar, make sure you have show transform controls on. If I deselect that, you're not going to see that handler. You can still move your things around. You're just not going to be able to manipulate the transformation of it unless we went to the transform tool, but that's a different tutorial altogether. Okay, so move tool, show transform controls. We can grab one of these little boxes around our item and drag it around and actually adjust the size of the item. So if I went to this lower right hand corner and started to drag, well, first I got to get into the transform mode by clicking once, and now I can start manipulating this skull here. Now you'll notice that it puts an X right through it. And what that's telling me is that this is a smart object, an object that's always going to look at that original image that we placed in there, so that it's not going to keep resampling the same pixels. It's always going to go from the original pixels, and you're going to have a lot more high quality image once you use the smart object. But there's some things that a smart object won't allow you to do, and we're going to go through that in just a moment. So I'm going to go ahead, double click to show you that I made that transformation. You will notice that there's some pixelation around this particular item. It's because we did bring it in. We kind of skewed it up, and we've made it too big. It's going to have a little bit of issues there. So that's fine for this particular demo, just showing you that out. I'm going to go ahead and back out of what I just did by holding a control and hitting Z on my keyboard, and that's going to take me one step back. Now if I keep hitting Control Z, it's only going to go between those two steps, which is not too helpful most of the time because you want to go multiple steps back. So Photoshop wants to give you that ability to toggle between two changes if you wanted just to kind of test what that last change you did was. One way to continue going back is hold Control, Alt, and then Z, and it'll keep stepping back every time you hit the Z. So you're holding the Control and the Alt down. Now on a Mac, I'm not 100% sure that it's those two keys, but we'll go over that in class to see what that is. If anybody wants to put it in the comments below this video as to what that shortcut is, then they can do that. And I might even update the description at a different point, or annotate the video. Who knows? This is new media, like we've been talking about. This is the social media out there. We can change things. It doesn't have to sit like it is, like I'm recording right now. Okay, so we got a skull on there. Enough of me talking about some bull crap. Let's go ahead and create a new skull. So I went to my layer. I right-clicked. I believe it was Control-click in the class on the Mac. And once you do that, you get this menu. So we duplicated the layer before. I'm just going to make a copy, leave that same name. Now I have two skulls here, so one right next to each other. The whole point of me doing this is I wanted to show you something. If I went to this skull copy that I just made, and I right click, and I go to rasterize layer, it's going to take that little icon away. So right now you see these two layers, they look basically the same. But let me show you what happens. If I decide to size this skull here, I'm going to size it down. Now, if you also remember from class, holding shift and then sizing from a corner will keep its proportions. This is important because once you start pulling it off to the side, you're bastardizing your image, and that's not necessarily something you want to do. You always want to keep that perspective. So I'm going to Control Z out of that. And get back to where we were before. Actually, I can just hit escape, and I'm going to go and not do that manipulation. So again, we have these two layers here. I'm going to grab the corner, I'm holding shift, and I'm going to make it a little tiny baby skull. And I'm going to apply that transition by double clicking. So we got a little baby skull, and I'm going to go to this skull, and I'm going to do this same exact thing. I'm going to take the corner, hold shift, and I'm going to take it down all the way to a little tiny skull. So at this point, everything looks basically the same. Applied the transition to both. They're about the same size. So what's going to happen when I decide to make this skull a little bit bigger? Well, remember the one we just rasterized by right-clicking and going to the rasterize layer? Well, if I go to that skull and decide to make it a little bit bigger, I'm grabbing the corners here, you're going to notice that since it resampled the actual pixels on the screen and I adjust it, it's going to look like crap. You can't resize a rasterized layer and take it down and bring it back up. It's not going to keep its original, it's not going to resample those original pixels. So if I go to this skull that's considered a smart object, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to resize the layer. I'm going to hold shift here. I'm going to bring it right back up to the same size. You notice the X through the screen. It's looking at the original image that we originally placed in there. When I hit enter, it's back to normal. So you can see there's a difference when you do some resizing. You're going to lose some quality if you're just sizing a particular layer without it being a smart object. Okay, I'm going to get out of that layer. We're done with it. Let's start talking a little bit about what you can do within Photoshop. So right here we have this skull layer. Maybe if I did want to go ahead and do some edits to it and I want to keep it at that size, I would always go and duplicate my layer. I don't like to mess with original layer because to me that is something that I can go back to if I ever need to get back to it. So what I'm going to do is just duplicate that layer. I'm going to turn the eyeball off for this particular layer just by clicking the eyeball. And what that does is when I get back to this copied layer and move it around, you're not going to see that layer underneath. So essentially it looks like I just have one skull in there. And that's all I need to know. And I know that I can always get back to this one, duplicate it out if I need it. Alright. For the sake of this tutorial, I am going to rasterize this because I'm at the size that I want it to look like. So I'm going to rasterize the layer. And the reason I wanted to rasterize it is I wanted to show you how you can use some of these tools. If I weren't to rasterize it, I'm going to go ahead and Control Z. And I click on this eraser tool, for example. You're going to notice that it gives me this little no, you can't do things to this layer. And that's because we're rasterized and it's just holding it in we're not rasterized. We're holding this in its original format. Okay, so when I rasterize the layer though, you're going to notice, oh, you can actually make some adjustments. I can use the eraser tool. So if I wanted to put some little pupils in here and click in there and you got two pupils. Alright, I'm going to Control Z out of that just as a demo. You can also draw on your item, so you can draw directly on this particular layer. Let's say I want to give this guy some eyebrows. Well, there we go. Got some eyebrows looking a little mean there. Maybe you want some teeth. Arrgh, crazy skull. Okay, I didn't like that. Maybe a little bit later down the line you wanted to remove that or adjust those eyebrows. Well, guess what? You can't because they're all locked on that layer now. There's no way it's separated from that skull. Of course, I can Control Z because I just made those, so I'm going to remove them. One other option is if you come down to your layers palette, click on this little folded up corner. It's going to pop up another layer above the skull. Now, on that layer, I'm selected on the layer. I'm going to select on my paintbrush tool. I can draw on it the same, put my teeth back in there, get my mean looking skull. Well, if I take that little eyeball off, look at that. I can take off those adjustments I made because I've only put that on that particular layer. So if I turned off my skull layer, you're going to just see that I have some eyebrows and teeth. So you're starting to see that you can composite things together using these multiple layers. That's a really important concept that you need to take into this class. So I'm going to go ahead and just remove that layer. I don't really want it. So what I did is, I'm just going to do that one more time, is I click on the layer. You can click the delete button at the bottom. It's going to let you know that it's deleted. If you didn't want to show it again, you could always hit do not show again. I never have this going, but I'm up at the default view, so I'm going to say delete that layer. Okay. So we're basically where we started. You got a little bit of overview of some of the tools that you can utilize. Let's start making some Photoshop magic. Well, if we take this skull, I'm going to kind of adjust it over here. And you'll notice there's this checkerboard background. So first of all, that background is not necessarily something that I'm going to want because it's just, there's nothing there. There's no pixel values. So I'm going to kind of just do this on the fly. It's not going to look too pretty, but I want to give you an idea of how you can do a few things. First off, if I click on this layer, you notice I just can drag these layers and reorder them in this list. So now the skull is on the top layer. If I put this layer at the very top, I'm going to click on it, and I went over to this paint bucket tool. Click on the paint bucket. Down here you have two colors, a foreground color and a background color. There's this little arrow dude here. If you click on it, it'll kind of flick between the two. I don't like the black and white necessarily, so if you double click, or actually click once, you're going to get this color palette. What's nice about the color palette is you can zoom this guy up and down, and it's going to get you just in the general range of color that you want to go to. The next step is then picking the color that you'd want to utilize. So let's say I was going to go for something like an orange, kind of Halloween-y color. You can notice as I click around here, this little screen is going to change. It's going to give you some different color values. We're going to touch on color, but just so you know that there is the different values. So here's the RGB colors that would make up that color. Here's the CMYK percentages that would make that color. And here's the hexadecimal value that will also make that color. So these are some areas that you might want to take note if you ever wanted to get to that exact orange. This would be the hexadecimal color that you can utilize. So that's not something I need to copy or do anything right now, but if you were working on a project in the future, you may want to just take note of that number. So here I go. And just as a side note, if you're seeing a little bit of a grid kind of shape here, you might have only web colors selected. So you don't necessarily need to use that too much. I'm going to deselect it. Just kind of wanted to show you that if you're seeing this, deselect only web colors. Okay, so let's get that orange again. I need it a little bit deeper and darker. Oh, it's a little too red. Okay, that's pretty decent. So hit OK. So once I do that, it's going to put my foreground color as the orange here. I can go back in there. I could double click the white layer, for example, and maybe I want to pick up a black again. So now I got a black and a orange. So I could just click my my paint bucket tool, which I'm on, and click right on the layer, and it's going to fill the layer with orange. That's one way we can put on that in there. And then since this is the type layer, it's going to fill that whole area with orange. What I can do though is I can just take that layer and pull it right under the skull, and the skull is going to be on top. So that is a way that you can start utilizing these layers and knowing that precedence does matter. I don't particularly like the orange all the way. I want to do some sort of a fade. So if you hold on to this bucket tool, there's also a gradient tool. So if you click onto the gradient, you're going to notice that it takes your foreground, your background color, and it's going to throw it up into a gradient up at the top here, so you can get an idea of what you're going to do. What I want to do is I don't want a linear gradient, which I'm selected on. So if I went over here, I'm on the gradient tool, I'm on the right layer, I can just click, hold, drag, and let go. And you're going to notice it applies that gradient across the background. So pretty cool trick there. You know what? Let's just go ahead and stay with the linear gradient. I can show you what this other one does. If I go to maybe with this gradient style, I could click in the middle, drag out. It kind of gives you this circular motion, but I'm going to stick with my linear gradient. I just backed up there. Okay, so this is starting to look a little like something. I'm going to click on my move tool. I'm going to click on my skull background. I want to really adjust this background right now. It's kind of blending in with my background a little bit. I want to pop this off this screen a little. So one thing that I can do, and we'll talk about this a lot more in depth, is you can right click on your layer and go to this menu called blending options. Now I could talk probably a whole another 20 minutes on blending options, but just wanted to show you that you can blend these different layers by selecting different effects in here. So if I went down this list, for example, if I put stroke on, it's going to put a stroke that you can adjust around your image there, which is pretty cool. So if you wanted to have it kind of traced out, you can select different colors for your stroke here. Just notice that when you're in this menu that you'll have to click on the particular item that you want to adjust. It looks like right now when I'm clicking on that menu, it puts a little checkbox in there. I know that doesn't do that in other versions of Photoshop, so you shouldn't have that issue. I'm going to deselect my stroke. The only one I was really wanting to work with right here was a drop shadow. So you can play with all these different blending options. It's really just tweaking these little sliders around to your liking and how it looks on the page. But if you click on drop shadow, you'll notice that there's these handlers. First of all is the opacity. Well, not first of all. There's this blend mode in the color. So I have this shadow here that's black. I'm just going to keep the black going. If you want to change the color, you could do that. Here with the opacity though, as I take the opacity down, you're going to see the shadow becomes a little bit more lighter, and it's going to eventually disappear once you get to 0. I'm going to keep mine, and you can actually type in the value. I'm going to keep it at about 50. This is the angle that the light is hitting your your particular image, I'm going to go ahead and say the light is hitting it from the front, so that's good. You can kind of see this angle right here. You can adjust it around if maybe you wanted to hit it from up underneath. This is just some general lighting. It's not going to take into account of what your image looks like. It's just going to take this as one big solid bitmap and drop a shadow right below it. You have the ability to adjust your distance. You can kind of see that right there. The spread of your shadow, how much it's going to spread out, how fine those little edges are going to be, and then the size. There you go. So you notice I'm going to just kind of tweak that in there. I'm going to pull this distance down a little bit. Okay, it's kind of popping up off the canvas. That looks really nice. I'm going to hit OK. All right, so there's about where I would want it to have gotten on Monday. We got almost there, just so you can get an understanding of these various tools and things that we got going. One other thing that you can play with is, I'm just changing my tools around, kind of OCD about things like that, is our text tool. So I did want to show you the text just a little bit and where we're going to be manipulating on Wednesday. So first off, I want to put in white text because I'm going to put the word in skull. So I'm just going to click on these two little icons here, black and white. It's going to reset my colors to the black and white foreground. I'm going to swap the colors because I want white to be the color I'm using. I didn't even need to click on that, but it just opened this palette. Be okay with that. Then I'm going to click on the T. The T is your text tool. So the text tool can work in a variety of ways. First off, you can go on and click on the canvas and it'll just give you the ability to type. So if I wanted to put in the word skull, I could do that right there. And I could also highlight that word. You can go up to the top. You can adjust the different sizes that you might want. You can adjust the different fonts that you might want your skull to be. Here's a it's a creepy one. Maybe we'll use that one a little later. I don't particularly like it. I probably won't like most of these. Homicide effect. That one seems really creepy. Let's put on the homicide effect. Okay, so here we go. I'm going to click. Remember the shift. If you hold the shift, you can do the adjustments to your layer there. So here's the skull. Now I made an adjustment, so I am going to have to double click or hit enter to apply that transformation. So what happens when you edit text and put text into your Photoshop document here is you're going to have a text layer that shows up in your layers. If you double click the T, it gives you the ability to go ahead and change your text if you want, do some manipulations to it. You can change color values of specific letters. So if I wanted maybe the K to be red, I can go and highlight that, double click, turn that to red, and it's going to click back on my tool here, and look at, we got a K that is red and bloody, a little scary. So that's the basics of getting text into your Photoshop. There's two other tools that you're going to be utilizing once you start using text, and that's this little A button. It brings up this A panel. Maybe the panel is just floating there, so I'm going to make this panel float so I don't have to click that little A every time I want to. And then there's also this paragraph panel. So these are the typical kind of things that you'd see in most text editing programs that allow you to do some of the stuff. So I'm not going to go through this panel because we're going to go through that in class. I also notice right now that there's this T. It's giving this faux italics. That's going to happen on there, so I don't want that. I'm going to double click it, take the T off. It's going to put this to its original kind of state. This is really if it didn't have an italics and you wanted to give it one, or a kind of an italics that would not necessarily be associated with this font style. Like I said, we're going to go through all these different items here, but again, these are manipulators. They're things that you would have just read in your chapter 9 on typography. We'll hit on some of those different things that we can talk about. We're not going to obviously be able to get into typography, all these different subjects that we talk about throughout the duration of this course. We can have full-on courses about that. But we're going to hit on the high points, things that you should look for and things that you should worry about when you're utilizing text. Now I'm using really a stylized text here, so this isn't necessarily the best example. We'd probably want to go with something a little bit more adjustable, like this pretty basic font, this skull font here. If I went in here, highlighted it, for example, I could adjust the particular distance between the letters here. So I'm going to go with the negatives, or I can go with the positives, and it spaces it out. So these are the kerning and the leading that we read about in chapter 9. I'm going to go ahead and keep that on 0. Now you can you don't have to apply it to the whole word. Maybe you wanted to just do it between certain letters. Maybe you wanted to adjust it between the K and the U. Oops, wrong one to adjust there. You want to do it between the K and the U. Let me back out here. Alright, it's not going to... Oh, there we go. Okay, so if I double-click T again, and I want to do it between the K, you always do it the letter that's in front of it, and then you can make your adjustment. So there we go. Put a little bit more space between there. So this is utilized for a variety of reasons, and we have to talk about that. The visual communications side, that was chapter 4, gave you a little bit of insight of how you want to arrange things on a particular palette there. So we'll go through all this in class, or at least answer questions that you might have. We want to be able to build up a logo. So I'm going to go ahead and put this guy back to normal and finish up with how you save this document. We should have probably saved this right off the bat. That should have been something that I wanted to show you. Just as a side note, you also have blending options for text. So if you want to go into blending options, you can do a few things. So if you wanted to put a stroke, for example, on there, maybe I want to put a, let's put a, green's kind of ugly. Maybe I'll put a darker green, kind of like a zombie green. Okay, there we go. We got skull on there. Looks okay. Not the best of designs that I got going here, but just enough to show you how you can utilize some things within Photoshop. So if you want to save the project to work on it a little bit later, you go up to your file. You can do a save as if you haven't already done this, and you want to save it in the PSD format. That's the Photoshop format. So I misspelled project because I apparently can't type, so I'm going to take that O out of it and exchange it right there. So project 1, save it to my desktop, and I'm going to save that project. Maximize compatibility, that's fine. We'll just save that. If it comes up, hit OK. So now I've saved this project to my desktop, and if I'm on that desktop, I can open it back up. You're going to get right into this particular layer view. You'll have all the layers to manipulate. You can turn on and off your layers. You can still grab your skull layer and adjust it around on the canvas. If you wanted to export it to a different layer that you can embed or share with someone, you can do a save as. I hit check in. I'm running out of time here because I got to do something pretty quick here. So you run and you go to File, Save As, and instead of clicking it on as a project, you have a variety of options down here. So you can select to do it as a JPEG, for example. So you click on JPEG, I can save that back on my desktop and hit save, and it's going to flatten that image. So at that point you wouldn't be able to have all these layers, but now you have a shareable file that you can use somewhere else on the internet. So that concludes this tutorial, and I will talk to you in class. If you have any other questions about what I've done or had any other comments, maybe I said something wrong, let me know in the comments. And yeah, that's it. So this is Adam signing off, and we will talk to you next time when we get a little bit more in depth on some of the functionality of Photoshop or whatever other program we want to play with for the day. Thank you for listening.